Welcome to Pivot Talk. I'm Rick Callahan. We had a couple of technical difficulties a moment ago, so thanks for joining us again. Today, we are talking to JR Logan of MakeHaven, a makerspace here in New Haven, Connecticut. Joining me today, we're going to have a couple of our regular co-hosts and panelists here. So we'll have Juan Salas-Romer joining us. So Juan, thank you for joining us in the program today.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Absolutely. And we also have Bob Bishop joining us from Apex Consulting, who knows a lot about helping people through pivots and understanding why businesses pivot through circumstances such that we find ourselves in today. So Bob, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks. Excited for today's show.
Absolutely. So today, guys, we are talking to JR. The subject matter is making an impact building community, a story of a makerspace pivot with JR from MakeHaven. So I'd like to welcome JR to the program. JR,
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I know that some of you guys have already started speaking right before we went live here, talking about JR's wonderful backdrop there. It's pretty quiet over there today, JR?
It is. No drilling, nothing. It's this one happens to be a green screen, but the actual place is much noisier.
Absolutely. So, Bob, do you want to run us through today's topic and what we really mean by making an impact?
Absolutely. I would like to start actually with talking about the framework that we use here in sharing where a organization was and where they were headed prior to things hitting in the past couple of months, and then we'll talk about some of the tough realities and the specific pivots. But I guess I'd like to start for those who aren't familiar with MakeHaven to allow JR to give a brief expose. What is MakeHaven? Where were you headed prior to March?
Yeah, so we are a community makerspace. And we have a whole bunch of different facilities. So it's sewing, it is woodworking, it's metalworking, and it's membership based. We're a nonprofit, and folks pay $50 per month to be part of it. And the major value proposition is that you can come into the space, you can interact with other people, you can attend a class, and learn how to do things. So that's where we are, and we have grown to 400 members. We crossed that 400 member threshold just before we learned about COVID.
Wow! Congratulations.
So that's exciting, and would seem to me. I mean, it's for me. It's been great to watch as MakeHaven has grown over the past few years. But it would seem to me that that the model that you had then would be very seriously affected by not being able to put people together in small spaces. So could you go into that?
We had to close our doors.
Yeah.
So that was it. We went from, and it was one of these things where, of course, we all experienced it as a evolving understanding. And we had the night that we closed, we had a potluck scheduled, and we had. When monitoring, we were aware of what was happening. We're like, well, this is the last event and whatever. And by the end of the day, it was very clear that we couldn't hold a potluck. So, it was an evolving situation. And I think the next day we were closed.
So where does that leave you if we go to that March, wherever we were there, 16th or so? What were the next steps that you took thinking about where to go with MakeHaven?
Yeah, so I think the first thing was really to try and communicate with our membership. That those are the folks that keep the place open by supporting us, and to let them know what we were doing and why we were doing it. And we pretty immediately got support from them, just verbally, like they understand why we're doing it. The next thing was to consider what sort of things we could do online. So very quickly, I started assessing what activities, workshops, learnings could be moved into an online space, and how could we do that in various different ways in order to have it feel like more than just a typical broadcast, really to capture the essence of that interactivity, because there are plenty of online videos that already exist for learning, but what doesn't exist is something relevant to our tools, relevant to our space and our community, and with people you may have already met and have some connection to through the community.
So it really allows you to use the role of facilitator that MakeHaven is in many cases virtually.
Absolutely. And we tried a few things. So we really wanted people to physically build things. And we tried having people come and pick up materials from a box at a central pickup point. We tried mailing out kits. We tried providing lists of things you could buy online and giving enough lead time. We found that it was the more work people had to do to get started, that barrier created a limited attendance. And so we ended up doing much more work on software, in particular software that would directly lead to being able to do a project once you return.
That's great. That's great. And so what's the response? What's the usage been for you at this point?
Yeah, I would have to look at the specific numbers, but I went through them and were able to get some great analytics, which is an advantage in some ways of doing things digitally. And it showed that the number of people that had attended was greater than our regular events. And we were able to do many more events because you're not physically setting things up. You're describing software. So the total number of hours, the total number of events, those increased. Although that special quality of doing something tactically, with your tactile senses of your hands, is lost, and so it's not a perfect substitute.
Do you see opportunities to be able to bring back things that would have a little bit more of that tactile component?
Yeah, I think still trying different ways and different ways to get the tools in people's homes, so that they can participate along. The one that has had a little bit of success is we did a soldering kit, and that was just a very simple kit that people could pick up or could mail, and then optionally people could get the soldering iron and all the other necessary components. So if you had them, you could use what you had at home. If you didn't have them, you could easily get them through either picking them up or ordering them online. And we did have some participation there, although it takes a lot more lead time if people have to do something in advance.
Right. Well, I'll put Juan on the spot here, and you usually have some good insights and thoughts. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I'm like dying to say that. I don't know, Bob. You haven't been in the physical space yet, but if you ever go to, and I don't think Rick has seen it yet, and being so close to our co-working space, I have the opportunity to go to MakeHaven, and I thought it was probably half of the size that it really is. It's huge. It's a really big place, and one of the things that in looking at the different stations, I said, well, this is to an engineer what a toy store is to a kid, or a candy store to a kid. And it's a desk of things to do. And can I try this? My mind was like, can I try this? Can I stick my finger here? Can I? Of course, there are different levels of knowledge, of training, and all that. And JR took me to all those tools. I'm married to an engineer, so I'm going to bring my wife pretty soon. So, well, no, I think that just commenting on JR and the way he pivoted the business and immediately thought of being useful to the community, which is just the natural way he approaches his business, knowing him for a few years, or knowing the business for a few years. I must say, it was no surprise to me that you took that approach. But the number of things that you had to do very quickly to pivot your business was really remarkable. I must say that, because you really did get a lot of following from people in the healthcare business in New Haven, as well as some people in the community that are very active. I remember someone even asked me about, do you have workshops for kids, while people were in lockdown and that kind of thing. So it seems like you kept a lot of the, social fabric, so to speak, of the downtown, active, which that's something I think that it created a great impact, and is continuing to create a great impact in terms of references of the city of New Haven and the different community groups that exist. So I commend you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And the space is a big part of what we do. It's part of the core part of the platform. But really what we are doing is we're trying to empower people and get them excited about doing projects and help them to realize that they have the tools to do it. And those tools are often in the space, but they're also software. They're also just the knowledge and the inspiration. And so the pivot really is to break those aspects which are not tied to location and try and develop those in a more organized fashion and take it online. And that's what we did as an organization. We also, so as we move forward, we started to realize there is a real need to use the facility, this big space that we have, and the community that has lots of technical expertise to help to respond to the crisis. And that's really, it was a two-part pivot. And so that was the second part of the pivot we were experiencing.
Right.
Yeah, let's explore that a little. I think I think maybe even was the first part, but either way, right? I totally agree that thinking of this in a two-part manner is a great way to go about it. And share with us what there are a lot of people out there making masks, doing a few things to help. But when I've seen the broad range of what MakeHaven is doing, it's very impressive.
Yes, well, and a lot of credit is owed to the staff and the membership, of course. And in particular, our staff member, the shop manager, Lior, was very quick to try and figure out what things MakeHaven could do best to help people in what was an unprecedented, but at that moment when it was just emerging, it was particularly scary and ominous, and a real sense of the dire consequences, and without knowing the scale of those dire consequences that were coming. And so he jumped right into looking at masks. Kate, who's our operations manager, really then took that on and brought it further and figured out how to leverage our network. So we had a network of people. She started doing online sewing sessions together just as an experiment. And that's something that we actually saw had a lot. It really resonated with people. And these are really informal sessions. They got together. They were all making masks. There were different patterns. And so they had the conversations that helped to connect what the hospital was using, different ones that would be useful to the community. We partnered with United Way to distribute those masks out to different nonprofits. And we learned about all the simple things. You need a little metal band that goes in. You need the pocket for the metal band. It needs to be a metal that can bend of the right length. And the group worked through all of these issues. Yeah, and you see some pictures here. So these are some of the first masks, and the situation changed. So at the very beginning, we had a very limited number of people doing just this emergency work, spaced and with masks in the space. And as the situation evolved, we had people working entirely from home and actually had drop points all throughout the city where they could drop off their masks. The next thing that became obvious that was needed was shields. And there was many people in the maker movement that were 3D printing these. And that's a great effort. But when we did our own analysis for what was the fastest way that we could get these into people's hands, it was to avoid 3D printing, which tends to be slow. It's great for one-offs and prototype, and we love 3D printing, but that was the tool we had, not necessarily the tool that we felt was best to get this done in volume. And so these are very simple. They're elastic bands, a little foam, and some sheeting. And the School of Architecture and Joel Greenwood over at the Science Neurology Innovation Lab at Yale both partnered to do what they do well and to provide advice and to do laser cutting of those masks or those shields. And then we got together and produced thousands of them. There's a lot of starts and stops, so not everything. We've produced, I think, 4,000 masks and 3,000 face shields. And then there was a crisis that came up around testing swabs. The city didn't have enough to actually do the testing. And we have a Markforged printer, which is a special type of 3D printer. And so these are very small items. And so it actually worked out that these items probably could be produced en masse using the 3D printer. And we had found, so this is one of these, they break off. So basically you stick it in, it doesn't touch anything else, it goes into the vial, and then there's a snap off. So it goes in there. This had been developed at other makerspaces and with the company that does the 3D printer. It turns out that we had all sorts of problems getting the swab to adhere to it. We had lots of technical issues. There was also different issues. We tried resin printing it through Formlabs, but then there was issues with the different diagnostic companies and whether or not they'll accept it that the city was using. So, and then we're working with folks at Yale to figure out the various chemical qualities. And this, Lior did amazing work coordinating all of the folks. And I'd say part of what you learn in this pivot is that it allows, because it's a crisis and so much is changing, you have to accept that you're going to go down some blind alleys. And because it was a crisis, we were accepting that, we just ordered a bunch of some materials and it's like, we think this might be helpful. And so it's really a judgment of, we don't want to waste the people on the front lines time. So we're working within our own community to try and find where there's expertise, but we also have to be bold enough not to assume that they have it 100% handled. And often as we went out there and made them aware of what the maker community was doing, what we could do, and then listened for where their problems were, we were able to find areas that they thought they really needed some help.
Great.
Oh yeah, I'll leave you for some other questions there.
Well, JR, if I can, I think that's really interesting what you said, that sometimes you, when you have a situation like this that is so uncertain, you have to go through blind alleys. And it seems to me that you try like 5, 6, 7 different things at the same time, but more importantly is the role of coordination with Yale New Haven Hospital, with Yale University, with all the talents that you had surrounding, what it's the MakeHaven community. And how quickly you're able to interact with them and find niches in what happened. Is there anything that you could tell us about something that clicked and actually scale, whether it's something directly connected to MakeHaven or some member of MakeHaven that gained that expertise while we were figuring out how to best organize in the city? Is there any particular thing that you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things, we were getting just a lot of email and communications in our own internal Slack channel for the membership. We were getting overwhelmed with requests, and we felt a need to really have a conversation in person. And so I just very quickly coordinated, we're going to do a meetup and we're going to talk about makers and what they're doing. And then I put that up just to get our community together, and I started putting out feelers to other people. And then it was the hospital said like, yes, we'll have our community coordinator join. And then I knew that was an important access point. So I started reaching out to other contacts, and that grew to be something like that first meeting that came together in a matter of like a day or two, ended up being 30 people. And we covered a broad spectrum of these questions and problems. It had a structure where I really limited people to presenting a 5-minute, case for what their problem was, and then kept all the brainstorming to the end. That way it didn't get derailed for folks whose time was really valuable at that point. And that was so successful that we ended up doing it as a weekly activity. That faded out as the network and who was doing what really became clear. But that really just, it happened in a flash. It happened unintentionally. It was really just recognizing that was valuable and then repeating it to the point where it had served its purpose.
Has that brought to you some thoughts about a makerspace being involved in some kind of role? And I'm saying this in terms of the industry of makerspace and communities like that, of the role of makerspace in working on projects that are short-term urgency, emergency situations of sorts. Is there something? Is there like some kind of, what's the playbook or the learning out of this?
Yeah. So I'm connected to a group called the Nation of Makers, which is a national association of makerspace spaces like us, and also makerspaces across Connecticut. And over, you see the same situation. I think it's my shop, so I'm going to say we acted quickly, and I'm quite proud of what we did, but it wasn't entirely unique. This is something that makerspaces did, and it really awakened this idea that with so much production that is being done overseas, that we have lost some of our own resilience as a country, and within communities, you need these sort of capabilities. Manufacturing is built to zero out all of the unnecessary parts, and so something like a makerspace, which is really just about exploration, means that you have this idle capacity, to build a wide range, that very, very different things. And so we could pivot very quickly into building things. What we weren't great at is mass production. And so what we saw was that we did masks or we did face shields, and then we would reach out to the Manufacturing Association, and they would help us connect to people that were in manufacturing, and we could share what we've learned, and then they could have a little longer scale up period, but they could bring things online, on a bigger scale than we could. So I think,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think that this opened up a conversation at the national level of our makerspace is part of the critical infrastructure of our communities and of the nation. Yeah. And I think that's a good question and a good conversation to have.
Well, I think it's interesting, Bob. I don't know if you've talked to JR about your canvas or the way you tend to organize businesses that survive and pivot, and how that tool could be used potentially to really explore farther the MakeHaven case study, so to speak. So on one side of it it's a community and it's a spirit that took action and brought about some significant changes in a very short amount of time, and how that could be something that to be scaled up. And what JR is saying is there's probably a bigger debate here, which is are the maker spaces are integral to that society and all the trends that we're seeing now in terms of mass customization. I should also add, JR, everything that has to do with additive manufacturing, which is you're talking about scale, but one of the things that we see in the industry is mass customization, primarily because now you have printers that could print metal and don't need retooling at all. So you could produce small batch of quantities, and you could customize very quickly. So I wonder how that will impact the whole industry as well, and also the reshoring of the industry, the production and manufacturing industry to the U.S., which is a topic that I'm sure we're going to hear more and more in the next years as the U.S. starts really rethinking about the whole value chain, and the risk of having the industries like healthcare and food being produced, the supplies offshore.
Yeah. So I mean, I think your observation about these digital fabrication technologies, whether it's 3D printing, which comes in a variety of types, CNC, and their accessibility, it is a game changer. What you're doing is you're compressing the design and the input into the manufacture and the production. And right now, these technologies are primarily advanced manufacturing for these. It's primarily for makers. It's prototyping, and in an emergency, you can have a high unit cost, and you can wait for that 3D printer to make some things, but it's not as easily scalable. But that technology is coming. As the software gets better, as the equipment gets better, it can be more hands-off, it can scale up. And then what you're going to see a demand for is, rather than every item that you go and get being cookie cutter and having to choose from these items, you may be able to customize through a web interface and go and pick it up at your local additive manufacturing commercial depot. And so all of these things are happening, and that gives great value to being local, because there's nothing faster than it popping out of a machine right by your home. It allows you to interact with the people around you in that design phase. So you get it, now you iterate, and now it can pop out another one. So I think that there's a lot of potential in these technologies to have value in that local production. And I'm looking forward to the prices of the production in these formats to go down as we work through the technology.
Right. So it seems that not only you have to pivot because of the situation of the pandemic, which brings about a lot of the community concepts, and also about the technology that's behind the educational component of the manufacturing. But there's also two forces that are happening right now in your industry. One is the mass customization brought about by all these new tools, new printers. And then the other one is like an industry-wide or country-wide phenomenon, which is like reshoring of the manufacturing. So I would say that your business is in for a change very quickly, which is exciting. Actually, I think you guys have the right things to jump it.
And I do think that there'll be a partnership with manufacturers. So one that had happened is there is these chambers. And so we were working with our partners to develop chambers that if somebody was coughing while they're being intubated, that shield. And this is something we saw. It's not something we invented. It's just something we saw online and figured we could make it. And we made several of them very quickly, but we were very happy to have identified manufacturers who do this type of work day in and day out and could take the orders and do what they do best. So I think there will also be additive manufacturers servicing the local population, and they'll emerge as for-profit entities. And I'm excited about the prospect of like flexible factories, factories with robotic arms that are the type of visual systems, so they can do intelligent sorting and manipulation of different items, that they can interact with the software that's feeding them what they need to make, and those are interacting with 3D printers. And so you have an assembly line of sorts where various items, each item coming down the line is a totally different item, but you're working with tools that are flexible enough that you can get that. And so, yeah, here's a picture of the chambers that Lior had developed. And what was great, this is an example of local iteration. We saw it in other places. and we built one based on those designs. But then we take it to Yale New Haven Hospital, and this is a doctor we were working with there, and it didn't fit well on the beds because their beds had were a different brand and had different sizes. They had other questions and other features that they wanted, and so we were able to very quickly iterate on that and move through the process before handing it off.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I think coming back to what Juan was mentioning a few minutes ago, the world-class organizations, right? What MakeHaven's doing is identifying there are things happening, right? There's reshoring, there's some of the challenges with COVID and such. There's a lot of trends. There's a lot of things moving quickly, and that's really important to take that and absorb that. But at the same time, you've also done a great job of identifying what you are and what you're not, right? Where you fit in the world of manufacturing, as you're mentioning, and then also identifying what you're trying to do. And when I talked to you about this initially, you mentioned community, right? And it's, to me, this thread runs through everything, right? Is the solutions development groups that you brought together. That's very much a community organization, a community activity, with a network of folks that you know. There's the community service of PPE equipment and such, and right, a great element of what you can do in a specific situation with a specific need in a specific time. And then there's the community of the just the general makers, and that what you led off with earlier on is what are the things that people are looking to do? What can we do as far as virtual? And I'm sure you've probably already given thought to what you can start to do as some of the restrictions are changing, maybe slowly shifting the offering. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think any organization can have only very few things that are core competences that they really know how to do, that they feel footed, grounded in developing. And so for MakeHaven, that core competence is really about the network of people that we bring together and move towards action. And so whether you're doing that in a space, or whether you're doing that online, or whether you're doing it in any other format, and through a partnership, that is a core principle that is central to what we do. So when we do it, we're doing it as a network, and we're doing it as exploration, and we're looking to pull in other people's ideas and incorporate that network. And so it's really just the venue that changes. And we have a couple other sub-core competences. I hope one is keeping a well-organized space. And that had to sit on the shelf a little bit during COVID. But it's focus on what you know how to do as an organization and expand on different ways that gets expressed.
That second core competency, it's really a competency. I can see myself leaving a drill and a chair or something, so I commend you for that. And my wife, the kids.
Yeah. Before we completely leave the product side, were there any other already an impressive list of things that were developed during emergency time? But there are any other things that MakeHaven or folks involved with MakeHaven were developing? Yeah.
So if you pull up the slides, one thing that a lot of makerspaces were doing is these are stress relieves. So these go on the elastic bands behind the head to relieve stress. And we decided at the beginning not to build a ventilator because it was too big. But then there was a big open source community wider than MakeHaven, and they evaluated that a ventilator would be something that is buildable. And the design came out of Israel. And so that little video that you just saw was our water jet cutting the first few pieces. This is a tool, a CNC tool that can cut through metal. And because we had the capabilities, and we didn't want to get into the detailed design of something we didn't know, but we could implement and collaborate with others. And so you start to see this, this ventilator design come into fruition. Now, the Israeli design didn't work perfectly because they'd scrambled to put it together. And so we were able to, considering that we were going to get supplies from McMaster-Carr, and we needed to think about what supplies were here and what we could get, and also what tools we thought would be likely. We started designing with the intention of producing a few ourselves and making that improved design available to folks. This is something we're still working on. We've made a number of improvements. We have a working prototype. It's just not one that is, it turns out as the situation continued to evolve, it didn't need to come into play as urgently or as immediately as we had first thought. This is an early version of it, showing how it squeezes with an ambu bag, which is something you might see in an emergency situation, people using. And then these are just our makers. So makers are pulling together the circuit board and then printing that out, working in CAD to design the files so that they can be printed, working off, doing sheet metal work. So this is then bending that metal together. And you see it start to come together and little iterations as we find problems on the base design. Incorporating different technologies. So this is 3D printing. We 3D printed this is a positive. And then what we did is we filled it with silicone so that you get the negative. And then we poured, and then those were two mated parts. So those two silicone parts came together. And what we could do then is produce a mold. And that was a mold that would make plastic parts that were very durable and then formed the protector so that the bag didn't get damaged. So we're dealing with metal fabrication, we're dealing with all of these different things. And so you're really working not only on an object, but on the processes that build it. And so you could see that, we got it to a viable product. Not sure why it's not full screen, but we got it to a viable product that actually worked. And so we're continuing as the immediacy of the need for these ventilators slowed up. We slowed down as well. And this project's still moving forward. And what we've been focusing on is repeatability. So we want it to be like many, many cycles. And we'll contribute back to the group from Israel. And so it becomes part of the larger network of knowledge of different people making different versions of these and having different techniques, so that as this is needed, perhaps overseas where there's less medical devices, or perhaps, let's hope not anywhere, but let's hope not here as well. These are now a tool that has been vetted and can be produced here or elsewhere.
That's so powerful. We do have a few comments I wanted to make sure we got on screen. So we had a comment from Cynthia a little earlier saying she loves the idea of makerspaces as essential parts of national infrastructure. That was a very poignant message that was stated earlier. And then Julia saying MakeHaven and makerspaces in general have established themselves as an important part of business community and the greater community. That was accelerated and proven during the pandemic, which absolutely, I believe, is what we're showing us here, JR, today, for sure.
Absolutely. I agree with those statements. And as we think about if makerspaces are part of the critical infrastructure, I wonder how it is that we support them, or do we create a list of, in order to be a makerspace that is critical infrastructure, you need these capabilities. And part of those capabilities is the network of people that are affiliated and are informed about how to use that technology. It's a little analogous to like ham radio operators, that that technology is granted a portion of the bandwidth, in part because we know that during a disaster, if centralized infrastructure has a failure or a breakdown, that this decentralized system with people that know how to use it, have the equipment, can continue to communicate. And although we hope and anticipate that not being necessary, we recognize value in that insurance policy. And there's some connection, there's some analogy to that type of thinking.
For sure. So question for you, JR. How does one become a member at this point of MakeHaven? How does someone at this point get trained on this equipment or get their hands on when it makes sense to do so? What does that look like at this point?
Yeah, so we had been closed. We are opening with in a limited capacity at this point on the 17th as indoor recreational spaces were opening. And as business offices were opening, we allowed some businesses to start operating because some folks do run small businesses and are developing prototypes here. And so it's going back to you go to the website and you sign up online. There's an online video that is our introduction. And we're doing scheduling to schedule to make sure that we've spaced and minimized occupancy, to do an orientation to the space in person and make sure you have the knowledge you need to get started. We're still working through, we rely on volunteers to do safety checkouts on the tools. Those all have videos. So we're well positioned and we've been moving to bringing more online. But we do a in-person, make sure we see you using the tool properly before okaying you to use that tool for most of our dangerous, or for all of our dangerous tools, or more dangerous tools. And we're working through how we can do that safely and where the comfort of different volunteers is different. And so that is I'd say that's an adaptation because we're doing much of the same of what we did, but figuring out how to do it in new ways.
That's great. Bob and Juan, so we have a few moments left on the program. Was there anything else you wanted to speak to as far as makerspaces in general with JR and get his perspective on that?
I don't know if it's in general, but I guess the last question I really had with this is, as you're looking forward, here we are almost halfway through 2020, but what would you say that where the MakeHaven is headed, where they're headed now, if you're looking at where you intend to be in 2021, how is that different than maybe you would have answered the question at the beginning of the year? What specific shifts do you see in the longer term direction of the organization?
Yeah, so one specific shift that we've talked about but has been bumped up by COVID and is not a done deal, but we are looking at a tool lending library so that in addition to coming in and using tools in the space, that we have the infrastructure that people can self-check in and check out tools, that they can take them home and they can do that work if they're members and they've been oriented to those types of tools. And I think that will bring more value to our members if the space does have to shut down, or if we have to be at a capacity limitation where it's harder to get into the space. And it expands the type of projects that people can do into more home projects. Another area that is not specifically related to COVID, but I think the interest is there's been an emergence in makerspaces in the idea of community biolabs. And these are spaces that do science. They're limited in what they can do to biosafety level 1, basically what you're allowed to do in a regular room, a kitchen that has the same sharing the air with other people. But there's a bunch of projects and community outreach that has been done. Those are patterns that we can follow. And there is some real science. There's people working on insulin and making that an open insulin program. There's people working on developing biomaterials that replace leather using the same bacteria that's in kombucha and bringing that down and integrating that into textiles. So those are areas that are bringing in this new emerging technology. And New Haven happens to have strength in biotech. And we should be a platform that's an on-ramp for people that don't necessarily have any knowledge to work alongside enthusiasts who have knowledge and are experimenting with things and get exposure to this this technology that is emerging and becoming more important and integrating with other tools we're using like 3D printers, and takes advantage of being able to do metal work to build your devices and machines.
Wow, that's awesome. Maybe one.
That reminds me at the beginning of the computer, of hardware computers, you really do it yourself. You know, that was kind of like the trend back then.
Absolutely, and there's it is computation and understanding what genes are doing, and all of this is coming into play. The network of hobbyists sharing knowledge is getting more and more important as these tools empower them. And I think that there's some initial fear that people have as a response, because like computers were at the beginning, where you think of the depiction of robots and how they are potentially the enemy. Biology is a tool, and the knowledge of biology is a tool. And it can be used for terrible things, and it can be used for wonderful things. And the knowledge of it helps us to actually understand how to get that balance right. Those tools and that technology is coming, and rather than having it just being in the domain of large corporations, I think it's in the public interest for people who are voters, people who are going to comment and be part of this society we're developing, to have a foothold in that technology, and a biolab's a way to do it.
I think that's a fantastic way to wrap up the program. So JR, just kind of recapping what you're mentioning there, of really, I see you mentioning kind of the idea of democratizing technology for communities, right? And it's how does a community need or want to use that technology to benefit their community? And clearly you've shown quite a few interesting photos and shared quite a few stories today, sharing how MakeHaven is a part of that, and enhancing our local and regional community here and beyond in the world. It sounds like you're connecting to a whole array of other makerspaces and beyond. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. Juan, Bob, do you guys have anything you want to share before we wrap up?
No.
I think that's good. Go ahead.
JR said it all.
Great.
Thank you, JR, so much. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you in New Haven, in the makerspace, and online.
Absolutely. And to those of you who are watching live, thank you so much for doing so. For those of you who are watching the rewatch after the fact, you could still comment on these videos. We will be getting notifications when those comments come in, and we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts through any of the topics talked about in this Pivot Talk. And for those of you who may be interested in coming on to the Pivot Talk show, just like JR did today, to share your story of a pivot, or perhaps to work through a pivot that you're looking to accomplish, please do check out known.live/pivot-talk. And as we do our outro, there'll be the link for that as well. So JR, Juan, Bob, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.